one last question perhaps, is that we do see government intervention when markets can't find equilibrium, when negative externalities are borne by people that can't redress those externalities, when corporations pollute the environment, for example. The government is there to create equilibrium in a market that can't find its own equilibrium, so to speak. Is this function, this process, creating so much negative externalities on investors? Because all these fees are ultimately paid by us as investors, right? All this cost is ultimately borne by us. Is it so profound that the government should consider, regulators should consider intervening somewhere, either to force the hand of issuers in their behavior, force the hands of intermediaries to reduce this fragmentation, or is this something that the market is going to sort out on its own, Barney?
So I think for me there's kind of two ways of looking at this. I think obviously anyone watching this from a banking industry would say, oh my God, please don't say yes, we want the governments. This is not an invitation for more regulation. But I think, at the end of the day, for me, what's been really fascinating about the blockchain journey is the total change in the way that we interact with our regulators. That basically what was great about the entire this entire innovation process that's been going on is that we all started at zero. In terms of knowledge, and it has been, at the beginning there was this kind of like regulator to institution kind of, what do you know, what do you think, and then there was an acknowledgement that nobody knows anything more than the other. So what's happening now is much more solutioning going on in the industry and a handshake between the industry and regulators to say, look, there's an opportunity here, there's ways that we need to do it. We need of you regulators, we need X, Y, and Z. What do you reckon? Yes. And for that interchange, so I think there is a great opportunity to continue the journey together of as the team that includes the regulator being a seat at the table. I think there are also, though, plenty of examples of really, really bad cases where we have asked regulators to arbiter, not legislate. And I think for me the big difference is to go to a regulator with a fuzzy idea of kind of, look, none of us can agree on this, but we need you to sort it out. And the regulator turns around, who's generally obviously not as expert in living and breathing all these things, and they come up with something that is substandard, complicated, and quite often actually creates more problems than it solves. I think for me, the real risk of basically inviting in the real risk of inviting in regulation is that we end up with bad regulation. The real opportunity in working with regulators to build a community project is that we end up having a perfect match, ideally, of industry objectives, legislation that supports those industry objectives, and something that's well crafted. So there's plenty of upside, and there's downside to getting this wrong.
Very well said, Barney. We're talking about a collaborative and trusting mentality between account owners and account servicers. Would that trust then also extend to regulators? And I like the way you said it, not through legislation, but arbitration, and bringing the parties to the table and understanding the technicalities of the issue at hand, and say, listen, we think you can sort this out. We want you to sort this out. If you can't, I'm always there in the background, and we'll consider, solving the issue if you guys can't. And with shareholder rights directives in Europe, there's certainly a theme that investors should participate actively in the governance of companies, right? There should be that kind of communication. I'm not sure it's been extended to information as it flows to investors, and that they have a right to understand consistently what their rights and entitlements are. But you have the same kind of, the subject of crypto regulation and different markets not even wanting to be left behind. We've seen kind of a change in administration in our world. Do you have the same hope that digital assets and its relevance in traditional finance, with oversight of regulators, do you have hope that we're heading in the right direction with all this, Dan?
Yeah, I'm not sure that I could top Barney's spectacular answer to this, but I'm going to take a crack at least some additional.
French words.
So I completely agree. The regulators are not good at prescribing technical solutions, saying for sure it shall be. This is picking the winner.
That's right.
But but regulators can have a huge impact on the innovation
That's it.
mindset and how agile is the movement of the markets. This is a wicked problem, though. So many folks, especially in the blockchain world, discount the importance of investor protection. And the real responsibility of regulators that, yes, we want to allow innovation in this space, but in the end, it can't be at the expense of mom and pop. The blockchain world, if you look at its history, mom and pop have lost a lot of money on scams and theft and other things. So we have to be more responsible than that. And I'm afraid, as there's now this real drive to move forward, even institutionally, some folks are forgetting about those responsibilities. We must move forward in a responsible fashion, and regulators have a responsibility to ensure that we do. However, this is a matter of national security. If our markets are not more efficient and accessible than other markets, value will move elsewhere. And so we do have to have a favorable environment. That means regulating by first principles, not that blockchain is a technology, it's a means, it's not the ends in this model. And so it's not either good or bad, is it being used in such a way that allows for trust and provenance and accessibility to thrive? And if yes, then it should be encouraged to move forward. And I think we're seeing a lot more signs of that responsible innovation. And that's the right view, in my view, of a regulatory framework.
And maybe that's your best role here, Dan. We figured today you're the linchpin between traditional finance and digital finance. In that, the digital finance people have to understand the issues of traditional finance and what it means to have certainty, legal certainty. Before I contribute any of my hard-earned capital, I want certainty on where that asset is and how I can find liquidity and pull it back if I need to. So the traditional world weighs heavy on a lot of investors. So if you can bridge the mentality of traditional finance and digital finance, convincing traditional finance of the utility of smart contracts, blockchain, and how it can solve traditional finance issues, and then encourage the digital finance people to understand the limitations and illegal infrastructures and certainty of the traditional finance world. Perhaps that's your biggest role in life, Dan.
Yeah, maybe. My kids would say,
humble job description.
So the blockchain world has this mindset that if you put your money into a bad smart contract and it gets lost, well, that's on you. That's not going to work at market scale. That's irresponsible in general. You can't expect grandma to be a smart contract auditor. You need to have trust and accountability in this framework, and that's established through tried and true models associated with this, such that people can trust the movement and safekeeping of their value. The traditional world has established that in profound ways.
Yes.
That must be injected into this new blockchain world in important ways, and regulators have an important oversight. At the same time, we can't afford the inefficiency and mistakes and lack of information clarity in the legacy world anymore, because it's holding back fair access to investment opportunity. So let's change both. Let's come together. Let's be responsible. Let's recognize the value of each party and actually drive to the world as it can be.
Now, Dan, you mentioned earlier T+1 and accelerated settlement. Every transaction in our world, every process in our world is truncating in terms of time. And we recognize time is literally money in our business. And corporate actions and the latency of how information is communicated from issuer onto investor and all the hands that it passes through in that process. And God forbid there's an anomaly that was a mistake at its origin, that anomaly bounces back a million times as well. Different time zones, et cetera. You can take days to resolve an issue. How important is time and truncating this time? How important is that in this discussion?
Yeah, I mean, so I think, if corporate actions and then other areas, I mean, the two stats that spring to mind in the corporate actions or asset servicing space is that I remember somebody saying that the average retail investor gets their dividend check about 52 days after the initial announcement of the dividend. So, 52 days of, an average earnings of about 2.5 basis points overnight. So that's just literally, as you said, time is money. The other way, though, that I think is you've got the compounding effect of absence of time on risk, because in the proxy space, some of the great platforms that have kind of been kind of implemented in the last few years have taken about 3 days out of the overall proxy journey from issuer to beneficial owner and back again. So if you think what that means, it means that basically before people they had about 4 days on average. The average portfolio manager would have 4 days in their day job to understand an entire AGM, to basically analyze it, speak to their colleagues, speak to the issuer maybe, and then understand how they were going to elect. 4 days has now become a week. In the day job, that is quite meaningful, because what was happening before is that basically when you've only got 4 days, everyone sends it through at the 11th hour, which means that the issuer then basically gets 90% of their elections within the space of a couple of hours, which creates huge operational risk. If stuff's getting lost, if stuff's incorrect, you're dealing with thousands of callbacks. And so the risk just kind of creeps up astronomically. So for me, the real thing is that by giving people more time, give people from 4 days to a week, suddenly they can get it back maybe a day before, maybe a day and a half before. That means the issuer's life is better. That means that the overall risk of the process is better. So better decisions, better communication, less risk, less errors. So time, the financial value of time is very, very clear. I think the compounding effect of absence of time is also is really hard to ignore, and I think that's true for all voluntary events of every description in the asset servicing space.
And maybe the same question to you, Dan. Time has seemed to be a component of the blockchain and digital assets, that instantaneous movement of value from one party to the other. Time has seemed to be a big part of that selling point of the technology. Is that something you'd agree with as well?
It is. It is the selling point. Blockchains form consensus in a matter, depending on the blockchain, of seconds in the big scheme of things. And so we say, as we went from T+5 to T+3 to 2 and to now 1, folks don't realize what a big accomplishment T+1 was. But now we look ahead and say, what about T+0? What stands between T+1 and T+0? In the end, what T+0 means is that across all systems, all dark pools, all trading systems, all distributed ledgers, all systems everywhere, we completely understand at every instant in time the total ownership record, such that if I strike a dividend at exactly this millisecond, I can say for sure all of the rightful owners. Make no mistake, that is a massive task. It's massive. And party will say, well, blockchain can solve that. Blockchain can solve it to, as I said, T+5, and by 5 I mean 5 seconds. A blockchain network can solve that problem. But there won't be just one blockchain network. And so now, what is the time sink? And what if that blockchain network is in the process of forking? There's a whole bunch of other factors that need to be accounted for as we accelerate this cycle so that we can get to record dates. And I think the best we'll probably do is T+5 seconds in this new world. I think that can be achieved in this framework, but it is a massive undertaking to get there. And it's not just about one blockchain. For the purists who are out there who think that this is going to be, that the existence of this or that great new network. By the way, if there was one network on which all truth would reside, that would mean it has to handle every transaction at scale, and blockchain can't. Really, theoretically, it's impossible for it to handle every state change that could occur in that world. And it would also be the end of innovation. Because what about the next blockchain network that's capable of actually scaling out? It can't, because we only have one and we can only have one, can't compete in that new model. We don't want that world. There's always going to be this process of pulling together the information to form consensus in a way that involves blockchain technology, to be sure, but more. And some of that more is what traditional systems are designed to do. But let's have that target. Let's get to T+5 seconds.
You're going to have to trademark that, T+5 seconds.
The thing I love, if I may, is just, in the context of T1 and all the journey that we've gone on in the last few years, how many people are still running overnight batches? So I love the idea of going to some of these people and saying T plus 5 seconds. You know, how many people are in the collateral space depositing collateral overnight because they want to make sure it's there by 8 a.m. in the morning? You know, how many people are basically putting collateral up even hours ahead of time just to make sure that it gets there on time? You know, the idea of getting down to sub an hour would be wonderful in an era of, you know, where we stand today. But, you know, as you said, the destination is there. But I think for me, the enormous ground that we can cover by moving from overnight to intraday of any description is vast. And again,
you pointed to it. You put the measures out there. It's in the hundreds of millions of dollars, billions likely.
Absolutely, yeah.
And, you know, in many cases, on a daily basis, we're talking about millions and millions.
Yep.
So there's the value proposition is there.
Yep.
Now it's actually getting all parties to align on the solution set, and that's where we need work.